What's going on, guys? Zuko back with another War Within video. Hope you're all doing very well. I want to talk about this article that I saw on Wowhead today. And it's talking about this new survey that Blizzard has actually sent out to a bunch of different players. And we're going to talk about the question that they're asking players and my response to it personally. And then I want to hear what you guys think in the comments down below as well. I want to hear, let's get a discussion going about this whole thing. So the question that Blizzard asked is this. In a new survey, Blizzard is asking players what they think about using a limited death counter instead of a timer in Mythic Plus. So if you don't know, Mythic Plus, right, it has a timer for every dungeon. It's usually like 25 minutes or something, right? Every dungeon is different. As you go through the dungeon, you're trying to beat the dungeon before the timer runs out. If you die in the dungeon, 15 seconds from that timer goes off if you're doing a +7 key or above, right? We're all familiar with that, okay? So they're asking, what if we just use a death limit? So like, they haven't proposed the numbers, but let's say, I don't know, below a +10, you've got like 10 deaths before your key is ruined. And then above a +10, maybe you've got like, I don't know, 7 deaths or something. And then above a +15, you've got like 5 deaths. Like maybe you can make it harder, I guess. I don't know. No idea what they would do. My initial reaction to this is that I don't like the idea of it. And I'll get into that in a minute. I'm just going to go through each of their points. Currently, the M+ system depletes a key when the timer runs out. In addition, the timer can be lowered by Challenger's Peril. That's the 15 seconds I talked about, right? So here's what it says. Benefits and disadvantages to Mythic Plus death runs, or death limits, I guess, as the way of measuring your success or failure in a key. So there's players who are for the limit. They're against this limit. We're going to start with those people. So people who want to keep it the way it is right now. People who want to keep the timer and not do this death thing. Here's what people are saying. Here's why this would be a problem if you introduced like a death limit as the means. First of all, you'd be waiting for cooldowns, and I totally agree with this. Similar to Torghast or Undergear Delves, with no timer, players may be incentivized to wait for cooldowns between each pack, leading to significant downtime and potential boredom. I think this is completely true, right? You'd be waiting for Bloodlust, you'd be waiting for your cooldowns on every single pull. And this ties in with the next point, which is no risk keys. Players would be likely to be more averse to any deaths, leading to smaller, low risk pulls that may focus on increased CC, similar to Classic. So it would have a very Classic feel to it, right? Where like you're fighting one mob at a time, or 2 mobs at a time, or heaven forbid 3 mobs at a time. That would be almost too much, right? Like people could like push a key level. Like they could do a +12 or a +15 key that they've never done before, but the only reason they're doing it is because they're pulling 2 mobs at a time. Very, very slow. And then they're also waiting for cooldowns. Like, you know, this is exactly what would happen. And so to me, this highlights an additional problem that they don't really touch on in here, which is the actual satisfaction or the personal like feeling of accomplishment when you're able to time a plus, you know, whatever key, a really high level key in the timer. There's a really good feeling that you get. And I think if you get rid of that timer, these kinds of behaviors start to crop up, waiting for cooldowns, pulling really, really small. And then by the time you get to the end of the dungeon, your sense of accomplishment is gone, in my opinion. I would not feel good about spending an hour and a half in a +15 dungeon. I wouldn't be like, yeah, I got a +15 done. Look at me. It's like, dude, you literally pulled 2 mobs at a time. You went really slow. You didn't do anything. You didn't actually do the dungeon. So that's another point that I would make. That'd be my biggest gripe about this whole idea, is like, your personal sense of accomplishment, I think, would go way down. That's what the timer helps to provide. It helps to provide this sense that you were able to beat the timer. You're able to do it in the amount of time allotted, and that means something, rather than it just being like, you know, you're pulling 2 mobs at a time. You're forced to do it within a timer, which forces you to do it in a particular way. And if you're able to do it, it feels really good. It feels really good to do that. The third thing that they list, again, for people who are against introducing a death limit, toxicity. Currently, deaths and even full wipes can be overcome with higher damage. Mistakes do happen, even with the most savvy of players, but these accidental deaths could lead to full key failure under a death limit. Now, I kind of disagree with this, because this happens anyway, right? If you walk into a necrotic wake and everybody dies on the first pull, you get 5 or 6 deaths on the first pull, people are leaving the dungeon. People are going to leave. They're like, it's over. If you introduced a death limit system and you pulled the first pack of Necrotic Wake and 6, 7, 8 people die, and then you hit your death limit, that the key's over anyway. So to me, this is a bit of a moot point. Like, this is sort of the exact same thing as it functions now. It would just look a little bit different. Like, as soon as you walk into a key and 5 or 6 people die on the first pull, I guarantee you people are leaving that key, which means the key is effectively dead anyway, right? So this point is not, I think this point is the same no matter what system you're using. If you have a death limit or if you have a timer on the key, it's the same thing. Now, there are some players who were for introducing a death limit instead of a timer, okay? And this is what they have to say. Flexibility and reduced stress. No longer being on the clock relieves a lot of stress from the Mythic Plus environment, allowing players, especially tanks, the time to plan their next pull or even step away for a quick minute with real-life demands. This is true. I think this is like kind of true, except again, to me, it gives you a false sense of accomplishment. Because if you're a tank and you go into a pull and you blow all your cooldowns and then you just sit there and wait for 60 seconds before you go to the next pack so you can get your cooldowns back, that's not a realistic sense of like how that dungeon should actually be going. You're not necessarily a good tank. A good tank is somebody who runs into a pull and pulls 20 mobs together, survives, and then immediately goes and pulls the next pack with no cooldowns and understands how to survive in that environment. This just like gives you, in my opinion, it gives you a completely false sense of accomplishment where it's like, oh, I can just sit here and wait for Last Stand to come back up or Shield Block to come back up or whatever. My wings to come back up for my Paladin or whatever. Eye of Tyr is a 40-second cooldown. I'm just going to wait till Eye of Tyr comes up every single time I start a pack because that way I'll be safe. It's like, this is just not realistic. I feel like it just doesn't give you a real sense of like what being a tank, like the skills that are actually necessary to be a really good tank in a high-end Mythic Plus environment is somebody who can blow all their cooldowns, go to the next pack, and survive that next pack without having really maybe one cooldown, but that's about it. Like, that to me is the signal of a truly amazing tank, in my opinion there. So I think that, like, I don't know. I disagree with introducing a death limit instead of a timer, but this whole point just doesn't make sense to me. Here's their second point, execution, not speed. A renewed focus on execution allows even the most under-geared groups to slowly and methodically conquer a dungeon, avoiding having risky skips just to keep up. Again, this is cool if you want to play the game this way, but I don't think most people do. And this is going to be incredibly boring. And I would argue, again, it really degrades the skill that it takes to be a high-end Mythic Plus player. To me, this completely kind of degrades, it brings down and it diminishes the accomplishments of people who are pushing the higher end limits of what Mythic Plus is possible, right? People who are doing plus 16, 17 keys when the average player is doing like a plus 10, right? What are those people doing that makes them able to do that? Well, they're pulling more efficiently. They're doing cool skips. They're inventing new and interesting ways to get through the dungeon. They're doing, you know, rogue skips and warlock gates up hills and like all kinds of stuff that you would never even think to do. That cool stuff that they get to imagine and they get to come up with, that doesn't happen if you have a system like this, right? Where you can just wait, where there's no urgency, right? Because there's no timer. So I think like you're gonna get rid of all that cool stuff, all the kind of stuff we see in the MDI, which is really cool and interesting to me. I think that's all gonna be gone if you have this this kind of death limit system. So I agree that, like, one thing that I don't like is that people see the cool skips that are happening in the MDI or whatever, and that trickles down into the regular keys, like a plus 8 or a plus 10, and then people are like, oh, you have to do that in order to be successful in a plus 10. It's like, that is completely not true. You can do very normal, regular pulls in a dungeon all the way up to like a plus 12, plus 13. I mean, I'm doing them right now on my character. I've done 12s and 13s. We're not doing anything crazy in these keys. I'm telling you right now, we're not doing massive skips. We're just doing regular pulls, and it's possible to get those dungeons done. So the problem with this is that the perception comes trickling down, where people start to believe that there's only one way to run a dungeon, and that's the way that the top end players are doing it at a plus 17 level. For your plus 10, you don't need to be doing that. You can just run it normally. So yeah, this whole idea of like, well, if we introduced a death limit system, it would remove the need to do risky skips. There is no need to do risky skips until you get to the higher keys where you absolutely have to do the risky skips because you're working on trying to be as efficient as possible. But again, to me, that's a really cool skill set that people get to learn at the higher end, and you'd be removing that if you got rid of the timer. Okay, last point for people who want to introduce death limits rather than a timer. Currently, damage is the primary concern with rigid compositions. Catering to this strategy, often excluding some classes altogether. Death limits offer an alternative where survivability and dedicated healing are highly valued. CC and defensive utility becomes potentially a larger factor. And then compositional gearing alternatives open up. This is probably true that if there's no timer, then there's no need to be bringing like the absolute best meta classes. You can bring whatever you want because it doesn't matter. But then again, it's like, in my opinion, it just goes back to the very first point, which is that you're automatically just signing up to have a slower, more frustrating run, in my opinion, because you're just going to be pulling like 2 mobs at a time, and you might potentially, you might actually even end up getting extra deaths because you're bringing very, very weak classes to a key. And they might end up dying because, people aren't used to healing them. They're not that strong in the meta. I mean, I am all for not bringing meta classes. You know me, like I'm all for that kind of stuff. But this idea that like, you could introduce this death limit and suddenly all the non-meta classes are able to jump into the dungeon. It's like, I guess that's true, but it could lead to other problems that you just don't know about yet because you haven't seen those classes or those specs in your keys. So ultimately, I completely disagree with introducing death limits. I think we should keep the timer. I think the timer is very, very important. I do, however, also think we should get rid of things like the 15-second death timers. I think that this is not the way to solve the Mythic Plus problems. I've talked for a long time on this channel, on Twitch and on YouTube, about how to fix these Mythic Plus problems. It's not by introducing a death limit thing and getting rid of the timer. It's by getting rid of these kinds of stupid affixes that completely ruin everybody's experience, especially this 15-second timer. I feel like if you got rid of the Challenger's Peril, it would seriously alleviate a lot of the problem. I think more people would be incentivized to play Mythic Plus because they know that even if I die, even if 5 of us die, we're only losing 25 seconds instead of losing a minute and a half, right? Like almost. So this to me is a bigger solution to the problem rather than introducing a death limit. But let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. Are you for a death limit counter instead of a timer? Or do you want to keep the timer the way it is and not introduce a death limit and then potentially, get rid of other things like the Challenger's Peril? I really think that I think it's fine that Mythic Plus has a challenge to it. And I think that to me, the timer really helps to increase that challenge, that urgency, that making the key feel like an accomplishment when you do time it. When you actually get all the monsters down in time, it feels very, very, very good. I can't tell you, like this feeling, I've had this over the last couple of weeks, right? I've been pushing, if you've been watching my Twitch channel, I've been pushing to try and get all the plus 12s done about 2 weeks ago, and I finally got them all done, and I can't tell you how good that feeling was. It was so good to be pushing and pushing and pushing myself and failing over and over and over again, trying to get a City of Threads done, trying to get Stone Vault done over and over again. And then finally, when I actually got it, it was the best feeling ever. And now I've been pushing into plus 13s, and that feels good as well. But that kind of feeling doesn't exist if you get rid of the timer. Let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. Thank you so much again for watching. Love y'all. I'll see you in the next one.